Good morning, everyone. My name is Philippa Kelly, Strategic Sites Manager for the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service. I'd like to welcome you all to the Joint Development Control Committee meeting taking place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 19th of June, 2024. I will cover the election of the chair, and then I will hand over to the chair to continue the meeting. But before I proceed, can I just ask members, are you able to see the two screens on either side of the room? Would you prefer this one turning slightly? Okay. Thank you, James. For the benefit of new members and members of the public, I will roll call councillors alphabetically to confirm that they are present. We have received apologies from South Cambs District Councillor Stobart, and South Cambs Councillor Garvey is attending as an alternate. City Councillor Thornborough has also sent apologies. Are you present, Cambridge City Council councillors Simon Smith, Bagent?
Yes.
Horror?
Present as well, Chair.
Smart?
Yeah, present.
And I believe we've got Councillor Florbert online.
Oh. I think so, she should be.
Yes, we do, thank you. And now turning to South Cambridgeshire District Council councillors Bradnam, Khan,
Present.
Fain, Hawkins,
Present.
R. Williams, and Garvey.
Present.
Thank you. Please could any member advise if their name has not been called out or if there are any other apologies?
I don't think we can see at the moment, Chair. Councillor Flober on that.
Councillor Flober, are you present? No. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 1, the election of chair. Oh, Councillor Williams is here. Good morning, Councillor Williams. That's fine. So moving on to agenda item 1, the election of chair. The JDCC's standing orders provide that the chair and the vice chair shall be drawn alternately from each of the two authorities. As the chair position was held by South Cambridgeshire District Council last year and the vice chair position held by the City Council, this municipal year the chair position should be held by a City Councillor and the vice chair position held by a South Cambridgeshire District Councillor. I will now ask for the names of any City Councillor for nomination for the role of committee chair. Councillor Smart.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Simon Smith, please, Chair.
Councillor Bradnam.
To second that.
Councillor Smith, are you prepared for your name to go forward for election? Therefore, we will proceed. Please can members raise their hands to vote for Councillor Smith as chair.
I'll make that known, Chair.
Thank you, James. Councillor Smith is elected as chair of this committee for the rest of the municipal year, and I will now hand over to him to chair the rest of this meeting. Thank you.
thank you for the nomination and the vote. Much appreciated. So, please could I ask for a South Cambs Council nomination for Vice Chair?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Anna Bradman.
And is there a seconder? Thank you. So, Councillor Bradman, do you wish to accept the nomination? Thank you.
Oh, I'm happy to accept the nomination, thank you.
And please can members raise their hands in support of that? Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I confirm that Councillor Bradman is Vice Chair of the Committee for the rest of the municipal year. The officers present in person for this meeting are Strategic Site Delivery Manager Philippa Kelly, Legal Advisor Keith Barber, yeah. Committee Manager James Goddard to my left, and the producer Chris Connor. So just a few notes on housekeeping first. Please can I remind members that the July meeting of the committee will take place in person at Camborne. The committee manager has also circulated Teams appointments for the meetings to members for the rest of the municipal year. Please can those present in the council chamber note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, may be broadcast at some point. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so councillors and officers are requested to wait a couple of seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Please can those participating in the meeting via Microsoft Teams indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column or raised hand option. Please do not use the chat column for any other purpose. The meeting chat is neither confidential nor private and can be subject to an FOI or GDPR request. So moving on to item 3, please could councillors advise if they have any declarations of interest and also to indicate which report their declaration relates to. Councillor Bagent.
Member of Camside, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to declare that with regard to the pre-application developer briefing at Trinity Hall Farm Industrial Estate, as a member of Milton Parish Council, I have received a briefing from the team, but I simply asked questions and I come to this matter afresh.
Very much. Thank you. So just move to agenda item 4. Minutes of the meetings of the 20th of March and the 17th of April have been submitted to this meeting for approval. Can those minutes be signed as a correct record? Badman, your comments on the hospital application?
Yes, thank you, Chair. No, this is this is the minutes of the meeting on the 20th of March. In our agenda pack, it's page 5. And on that page, it's a recording of the amendment that was made at that meeting under 17.6,
Right, okay.
which is in the middle of the page, and it starts off a total of 22 units. But further down, it says, it's just a really trivial matter, but it's just worth it to get the wording right. It says, notwithstanding the proximity of the units, the layout of the parcels and blocks have been carefully designed and windows have been arranged so that those serving rear habitable rooms do not face windows. And then it says at habitable rooms. And I think it should say of habitable rooms, if you're happy with that.
Any other comments, edits, typos? Okay. Can we agree those as the correct record of those meetings, please?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So agenda item 5, which is the main bout for today's meeting. Pre-application developer briefing, Trinity Hall Farm Industrial Estate, Nuffield Road, Cambridge. The process of the briefing will be, the developers will be invited to present for 20 minutes. Members of the committee will then be able to ask questions for up to 25 minutes. So please can I ask the developers to introduce themselves and their colleagues assisting with the presentation. And I invite councillors to ask questions once the presentation has finished. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Morning, Chair. Morning, councillors. My name's Richard Selby, the applicant Brockton Everlast. This morning we're going to be talking about the Trinity Hall Farm Industrial Estate, which is located on the intersection of Milton Road and the guided busway. The site in question is outlined red on the image that you can see on the screen. It's framed by Cambridge Science Park, Cambridge Business Park, and the Anglian Water Sewage Treatment Plant regeneration to the northeast and northwest respectively, and to the residential neighbourhoods on the southeast and southwest of Chesterton and King's Hedges. We consider this to be a very key site for those reasons. This is a slightly more expansive view of the site. It covers a little over 3 acres. It's 40% covered by buildings. Those buildings are predominantly of low quality light industrial and commercial buildings. The balance of the site is made up of hard standing areas which are used for servicing the light industrial and commercial and 153 vehicles. We consider this to be a strategically important site that's definitely underutilised and fails to make any kind of positive connection to its existing and perhaps emerging mixed-use context. The opportunity or vision for us is to try and redevelop the site and deliver an urban quarter of best-in-class, highly sustainable science and technology buildings. But we want to make sure we do that where the proposals also positively respond to the site's distinctive and varied boundary conditions and take into consideration the wider current and future urban context. Along with a fully engaged design team, we've been working with officers and wider stakeholders now for nearly 2 years, as you can see in the bar chart at the bottom. Following today's briefing and responding to the feedback, our plan is to have a further public exhibition, second sitting with the quality review panel, and our target is to submit the application by the end of this year. I'm going to hand you over now to our lead designer, Gavin Henderson of Stanton Williams, and he'll explain in way more detail our design response.
Thank you, Richard. So Richard's outlined some of the key vision behind creating this new urban quarter. I'm going to talk about it in a bit more detail. Firstly, I want to explain some of the key principles underpinning the scheme. Then we're going to walk you through key views of the scheme, all from street level. It's all about the human perspective, really, from the member of public or the building user. That's central to our approach. And finally, we're going to touch on some long-distance views, LVIAs and TVIAs, because those have been central to the discussion with the planning officers and setting the heights and massing of the buildings. In terms of those key principles, I think firstly and foremost, sustainability is at the heart of our approach and of Brockton's vision for the scheme. This is a net zero carbon development, which aims to set really a new benchmark in terms of environmental performance for developments in Cambridge. So we're targeting the highest levels of accreditation, as you see here, and very high levels of performance. There isn't time to go into that in detail, but I think the key thing here is that all project targets exceed current planning policy and meet emerging policies. And just as one example, because we all know this is critical in Cambridge, in terms of water conservation, we're aiming to set an exemplar significantly reducing demand, collecting all of the potential rainwater and grey water for reuse. And that's really an innovative approach. So it's enabling us to target all of the BREEAM credits for water, including the credit for innovation. As Richard said, the design concept is very much about the creation of an urban block that responds to its context and edge conditions. So that's very different from the big single building science park developments that we're all familiar with. This is about science with a public face. So it's about creating high quality public realm and active frontages along the Milton Road edge and along the guided busway, and that includes the creation of a new public garden opening off Milton Road at the southern end of the site. In the centre of the scheme, as you can see here, there's a communal courtyard garden for the tenants of the buildings, and that's about promoting interaction and their well-being. The scheme's broken down in scale into several different buildings. So we have 2 science buildings on the east side of the site and 2 office buildings on the west side of the site. And there's a smaller scale and more granular approach to that southern boundary near the residential properties in the Chesterton neighbourhood, and a real opportunity, we think, for a building that marks that important corner of the Milton Road junction with the guided busway. The building we identify here as A3 is a corner building which marks that junction. We envisage this as a family of buildings, so they're differentiated in language, but they share a palette of brickwork and precast, which draws on, I suppose, the traditional materiality of the Cambridge context. And it's very much a landscape-led approach to the scheme as a whole. So 50% of the site is given over to landscape rather than building. That supports our biodiversity and SUDS strategies, but it's also very much about sorry, I've skipped across there. So if I move back, this is about, the landscape strategy is about enhancing the public realm and creating active ground floor uses, including cycle entrances and receptions and retail spaces. This is the view along along Milton Road, and that is part of this wider landscape strategy that I was discussing, and about reimagining the public realm. So this is that public garden opening off Milton Road, and just as a scale comparison, it's a very similar size to All Saints Garden in central Cambridge. It's a very different context, and I'll come back to this space later, but a real opportunity to create a space for the community here and a space where the community engages with the scheme. On the right-hand side of this image, you see what we're calling South Mews. This is the boundary condition with the residential properties to the south. And here you see the before and after of this view. So what we're doing is replacing the existing industrial sheds and vehicular areas with a high-quality pedestrian space with a densely planted boundary and trees along that edge with the residential properties. And just to explain that a little bit more graphically, on the top here you see the existing condition with industrial buildings built right up on the boundary edge next to 454 Milton Road. The new buildings are taller, but they're pushed well back from that boundary, and the outlook from Milton Road is now onto that soft landscaping area and pedestrian access. So taking a step back now from the site itself, in the broader context, it has very high connectivity, which supports the proposed development. That's informed our access strategy to the site. So we have principal pedestrian and cycle entrances on the guided busway and Milton Road, and a single vehicular access from Nuffield Road. The high connectivity is also allowing us to create a modal shift towards more sustainable forms of transport. So you can see here a great increase in proportion of cycling to the site. We're also delivering a 50% reduction in terms of car parking on site, with a commensurate reduction in terms of vehicle movements and trips. The remaining car parking and cycle parking is located at basement level, which is what's allowing us to deliver the very high quality public realm. And of course, we're encouraging the cycling through very clear, legible and welcoming facilities. So this is one of the arrival points off Milton Road, heading down into that lower level car parking facility. In terms of height and massing, that's been a key discussion with the planning officers. What we've agreed is an evidence-based approach, looking very closely at LVIAs and TVIAs, the long-distance views. So it's been an intensive and iterative process, and I'll come back to that later, and it's defined the heights of our scheme. And at the lower level here, you can see a section that shows on the left the heights of our scheme in relation to other emerging projects within the adjacent areas. And I think key to this is that it's not a single height to all the different buildings in the block. It's very much a varied roof line, stepping up and down and stepping from taller buildings to the north, adjacent to the guided busway, and then lower buildings to the south, adjacent to the Chesterton residential area, which is what you can see here. Now I'm going to take you on that sort of ground level walk around some key views of the scheme. So this is the new public garden on Milton Road. We're proposing a community-facing cafe that you can see in the building in the centre of the image. This is the most sunlit part of the site, and that building's set back 30 metres from the edge of the road, so it's well away from traffic and noise of the Milton Road boundary. And it's very much about creating a landscape that's at a human scale, enriched with planting and active frontages on the two sides to the left. This is that densely planted Muse Street, replacing the existing boundary with the industrial buildings that are there at present. And you can see these are the smaller buildings on the site. And as you move down the Muse, the scale reduces again to create more intimate areas around the entrances into these buildings. The science buildings have a scale that's appropriate for the delivery of flexible, sustainable science space. This is on the Nuffield Road side. And the vehicular entrance here is treated as very much as a forecourt, a landscape forecourt with permeable views looking through into that central courtyard. So it's very important to us that this building doesn't have a back. All of these sides are important, and this is a significant communal entrance for the scheme between two of those main buildings. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the guided busway. At the moment, the site is fully fenced to the guided busway. So we're opening all of that up to create more space for pedestrians and for cyclists. So this is one of the primary cyclist entrances onto the guided busway. And further along the guided busway, this is again one of the entrances into the science building. And you can see through, you get through into the courtyard with this enhanced area of public realm in front of the building. It's a project that has, your experience of it, as in all buildings, is kinetic. You're moving around it. So here we're stepping back further along the guided busway. You can begin to see the way that the building breaks down into different forms and elements. And as you move closer, the corner building is the most articulated building form and marks that important junction on Milton Road and the guided busway. Is differentiated from the science building on the left. And what we have is taller buildings facing the guided busway, and then they step down towards Chesterton to the south. And this brings us back round to that new public garden where the landscaping, the substantial mature tree planting that we're proposing along the Milton Road edge is also enriching that urban experience of the public realm and active frontages of the space. Well, we've actually looked at 32 different long-distance views, so we're not proposing to run through all of them here. The planning officers have identified 7, which are of particular importance, so those are what we're going to illustrate. And they, as I said before, those are what have been defining our heights as we've developed the scheme. And we've been working closely with specialist consultants who have assessed the impact of these different views. So the overall assessment of the townscape views is that the project has minor, or in some cases negligible, impact on the views, but a beneficial impact in terms of marking that important junction. So this is looking up Milton Road from near the Golden Hind pub, and then as you move closer up the road, and you can see here how the roofscape is broken up with the lower level buildings in the foreground, the taller buildings behind. And here we're looking down Milton Road with the larger Science Park buildings on the right-hand side of the image, and the building straight ahead. And looking down the guided busway past the industrial estate of Howdens. The landscape views that we've looked at are obviously critical in the Cambridge context. The assessment of these views has generally been that they're all negligible in terms of impact. It's actually very difficult to see the project, which is picked out by those two red lines. Even in winter, it's almost entirely screened. So this is from near Fen Ditton. And again, this is from Ditton Meadows. It's almost invisible behind those existing buildings. It is more visible from the Jane Coston Overbridge, where it marks a landmark at the end of this vista. And that also needs to be understood. In the context, the emerging context, I'm not sure if you can see the green and red lines on the image on the right, but obviously all of that foreground is subject to redevelopment that substantially changes this view. So finally, in summary, I hope we haven't actually focused on these individually, but we hope that what comes across is that underpinning this whole scheme and stitched through it are the 4 Cs of the Quality Charter. So the community benefit of the enhanced public realm, the active frontages, and the new public garden, optimising the exceptional connectivity of the site and using that to drive a change towards more sustainable forms of transport, the climate-focused approach to design and sustainability targets, and then I think fundamentally the principle that we see this not just as a series of buildings, but as very much of creating a new urban quarter with its own character and a distinct sense of place. And I think, speaking now as Stanton Williams, that's something we are very excited about. We all know that the science economy is very important to Cambridge, and Cambridge has this very unique urban fabric, but they don't really come together in what you could say is the traditional science park model. So, we feel this is an incredible opportunity to set a new paradigm for doing science in a more sustainable way and a more urban way, and integrating it into the vision for this part of Cambridge. So I think on that, I'd stop and hand over.
Thank you for your presentation. I think that's unprecedented to finish within the 20 minutes. So I think you can claim an area record for that. Thank you, that's much appreciated. So we now move on to member questions. Members are encouraged to ask questions, seek clarification on the developer's presentation, and reminded yet again not to express any opinions on the presentation proposals, so as to suggest, imply a closed mind. Okay, so can I just have, I've got you, Councillor Bradman. Who's going to be wanting to, you just book your place, please? Let me take these down. Yeah, I got that. Okay. Okay, thanks very much. So, Councillor Bradman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. Very useful. I'd like to ask you, firstly, 2 questions about height and then another about water. So, The first one is that your A3 building, when you look at it from the busway side, it appears to be 6 stories. And then from the side of A4, it looks as if it might be 4 stories from the community garden. So can you just clarify if it steps down at the back? The second point about height is that the A4 building appears to be 3-storey, and it replaces what was a 1-storey building beside the residential properties on Milton Road. And I appreciate it's set back, but I wonder if you could just go into a bit more detail on the impact of that on the residential properties on Milton Road, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bradman. I'll sort of hand over to Eleni from Stanton Williams, who I think can firstly clarify the story heights and then talk about the residential amenity as well.
Sure. Good morning. I hope you can all hear me. Firstly, if we can answer the question on the corner building A3. This is a ground floor +4 plus plant. To be honest, the top floor is half accommodation, half enclosed plant room, which is within the envelope of the building. And in that guided busway view, what you are viewing is a broken form so that we can see 2 smaller distinct buildings with significant setbacks facing the south part of the site where we've introduced a loggia, and that's what you can see.
View. This is the Milton Road view.
Yes. Shall we flick back to the... That's right. So it's ground +4 plus the top floor, which is half accommodation and half plant room. So
So in fact, it's
yes,
on ground +5.
that's right.
Yeah. And it steps back.
It steps back. The 2 distinct forms are visible from this view. A larger form that's appropriate to the corner and addressing the junction at Milton Road, which is facing here with the articulated open corner with the facade on the precast expression. And then the building is broken into a smaller volume to the south, which introduces a further setback on the upper floor, which has the introduction of a loggia, and that's what we could see in the last view that we had up on the screen.
So that gives the height difference that you can see there. So you've got ground +3 effectively as the facade on that garden.
Second question related to the relationship between the Block 4 building, which is close to the residential properties on Milton Road, and how that would look from there. Because obviously they've only had a building which I think had a sloping roof down to the boundary, so
Yes,
would
if
have
we
not
get
have
that.
impinged on their view very much. But now they've got that on the other side.
There we go.
The previous one that you flicked past would have been a useful, yes, that one.
Okay, so the existing condition has a single-storey industrial shed along the boundary line, and then a taller building, I believe it's up to 11 metres high with a monopitch. It's an industrial use building, which is what we see at the end of that photograph on the left-hand side. The site, obviously, at the moment is dominated by parking and deliveries, and that's the outlook that the current residential properties have. We are increasing the setbacks of our proposed building, which is a ground +2 floors. Any plant room is incorporated in this sawtooth roof form. So from the existing condition where the buildings are on the existing boundary line, our proposed building A4 is 16.5 metres away from the 454 Milton Road. Further along this Milton Road view, there's also Belvedere House, which is built on the boundary line, and it has a blank facade up against the sight line without any side-facing windows. And then our proposed science building A1, which has a lower form along the south mews, is the height of that lower volume is within the height of the pitch roof of the industrial sheds at the moment on the site.
And if I may just sort of add to that, in relation to the plan at the bottom, which is the existing, just in terms of the existing relationship, so, on the top, yes, sort of 454, you actually access that with the sort of the dotted arrow, so it actually goes effectively through the building. There's a first floor above, but the actual, the access to that goes underneath where you've got that sort of longer black arrow is at the top. So all of that area immediately adjacent to the site is the manoeuvring space. So it's the driveway through to the parking at the back. And that property is principally facing front and back. I think the other thing to say is that the site is obviously almost due north of this, so there's no effect on sunlight. We have done a daylight assessment, BRE assessment, so that sort of forms part of our assessment as well. As I said, the other impact we look at is outlook and overbearing, but the principal outlook there, as I said, is front and back, and you can just see the sort of small green rectangle immediately behind the built form at 454. That's the garden area to that, which again is set off the boundary. So certainly the area immediately adjacent to the site is also just the car parking and manoeuvring space.
Your permission, can I just ask a question about water? Thank you. You mentioned that you were very mindful of water conservation, and you're mindful of the concerns that we have in Cambridge about sufficiency of good quality water. And you talked about you were collecting rain and grey water. I was just wondering, could you give us a bit more detail about how you plan to do that and what you plan to do with it, and how will you use the collected water? Because grey water is notoriously difficult to deal with. So if you could explain that, that'd be helpful.
Sorry, can you hear me? It's a three-step approach to the water conservation strategy that we're employing. Firstly, it's about significantly reducing demand, and that's achieved through low-flow appliances within the development. Secondly, it's about collecting all the potential rainfall that will be falling on the site, and that includes green roofs through landscapes, through permeable paving and blue roofs as well as collecting all the grey water that will be produced essentially through the development. And the combination of rainwater...
Grey water is from the showers, from the basins.
That's
We
right.
are collecting all. And
all the water from the wash hand basins and showers. So the combination of the rainwater collection, the harvesting, and the grey water harvesting is essentially what is allowing us to achieve a 60% improvement over the BREEAM requirements. And to get into a little bit more technical detail, it will achieve up to 90% of our WC flushing, which is exemplar in this setting. We will be achieving all water credits for BREEAM plus the one in innovation.
Could you just clarify what you will then do with that water?
The
Once you've collected it, the grey water and the rainwater?
It's to be used for the WCs within the buildings, and also for the irrigation.
Irrigation.
Okay, thank you.
Allow us 40 days dry period for the landscape and flushing of the toilets. Rather than drinking water, it's grey water and rainwater. How we manage to get innovation point, which is very difficult, is by this very comprehensive approach. And we have containers under the building which store this, and they are used when needed. So it gives us that flexibility. Thank you.
Much. Councillor Pora, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. There were lots of positives, but I appreciate you'd rather hear about the things we want to question, so I'll move on to those. But it is welcome to see some innovative water strategies. I think when this comes forward, it will be useful to see a comparative use between the current site and what you're proposing, So obviously the EA direction is no further water stress, which I think we've brought up at this committee before. I know you've still got, nearly 50% parking. That will be in the basement. I mean, certainly this is an incredibly sustainable site, particularly if the Hartree site follows on. You know, there's park and ride, there's cycling. So, you know, I just note that is, you know, I think this committee are not particularly wedded to. I think it would be interesting to see a justification of why you needed that many parking spaces, and certainly looking at how you could, for example, convert in future to things like cargo bike parking. So I saw you had 5%, but actually, if you are genuinely wanting to get rid of cars, a lot of your staff will be dropping their kids at school and will need to park those bikes, and you don't want them littering your, you know, amenity spaces. And my first thought of the design, it's quite grey and beige. It's not necessarily a problem, but I think that I'm interested as to why that colour scheme with no sort of highlights was chosen. I'm not advocating bright green, bright red, bright, you know, just something perhaps to draw the eye, particularly on the bigger, blockier buildings. And I was interested about the massing on the tallest building. I've forgotten which A building it was. That was very, very square. And I do appreciate sometimes to hit your kind of sustainable targets that can be necessary, but often we've seen other buildings in this area with setbacks or some kind of greenery added, although I always add a note of caution about green walls because they tend to be dead walls quite quickly. So I was just be interested in your comments as to why that is, when we've seen, I think, other buildings pushing out onto the A14 and things where there has been that kind of setback at the top level that slightly reduces the visual impact. Although I had fewer concerns from the railway end, it was more from the Milton Road end. Would there be a cafe or toilets there? Because I noticed you talk about obviously you've got the internal courtyard and the outside space, but obviously that outside space will be useful if there's some added amenity. I don't know whether you're looking at food stalls and things like that, but then you will need toilets and a cafe. We had some very innovative changing places toilets come forward, and disabled toilets and things like that, just if you want to integrate with the community.
Zipporah.
And I think that's everything.
Is that
Pleased
it?
to know.
Yeah, because there was a speech and there were a few questions wrapped in there.
Yes.
So if you picked out the questions, can I just ask other members to be, you know, just ask a question, please? Else, not everybody's going to have their opportunity. Okay. So you could be in detention for that kind of conduct in this committee. Thank you.
Gavin, do you want to start on the buildings? But I mean, I suppose just before we do that, so in answer to the question, yes, there is a sort of cafe proposed on the frontage of A4. I think there are also 2 retail units at the ground floor in A3 as well. So we want to make sure there's activity around the public garden. But if I pass over to Gavin on the buildings, the sort of design or and the colours.
The design and the colours. I mean, our approach is always to try to draw from the context. And you know, in Cambridge, we tend to think about the Galt brick and stone as the starting point. For those of you who may know some of our other work in Cambridge, that's the Sainsbury Laboratory in the Botanic Garden, the Simon Sainsbury Centre on the Judge Business School, which work with that kind of palette. We are obviously at a point still where we're developing the designs, and what we're now working into is another level of richness and detail. And you know, there's a variety here of brick colours. We're not really sure exactly. You know, we're still looking at what that actually is. We worked also at Northwest Cambridge, where I know a lot of people think that's quite beige. But so you know, there's a balance there between you know, how much we sink into that kind of contextual approach and where we might actually you know, strengthen it with accents or an enrichment of detail. So I think that's still something we're looking through.
Into the massing.
The massing. So we have a very. You'll have noticed A4, which is the smallest one. It has a sawtooth roof. That's deliberately kind of forms a bridge to the surrounding context. And then the building along Milton Road, which is A3, actually is quite complex. We didn't go into it in detail, but it's it's broken down, as I think Eleni started to get into two different forms. There's a loggia at the top. The building at the corner is I suppose, deliberately quite a simple form to make a stronger statement on that corner. So it's so we would see that as a positive in response to other elements that are more broken down within the scheme. But again, something where there's still more detail to work into in terms of the enrichment.
It's the richness of the detail, isn't
Yes.
it, that you work
Yeah.
on? It's simplicity of the form with the richness
Yeah.
of the detail, play of the texture, and
We have a lot to get through, so I'd like all the questions out on the table so you can take those away with you rather than actually give us a detailed explanation now. So if we can, run within our time limit, I think that's the best way of using our time. There was a question about justifying the number of car parking spaces and about the balance between the types of bicycles, two-wheelers, because obviously I think we foresee an increase in car bikes, electric scooters and so on and so forth. These all need to be accommodated. We don't want to be messing up the public realm.
So, I mean, perhaps just to clarify, it's certainly not 50% of the people coming by car. It's a 50% reduction on what's there at the moment. So, the kind of pink or red wedge in the right-hand circle that you've got there is the car use. It's actually a small proportion, and yes, the car parking is designed so that it can be easily adapted to other uses in the future, because I think we all hope and expect car use will continue to reduce. And there's been a lot of work gone into the cycling facilities to ensure that they have space for cargo bikes and all the other facilities that we need. I don't know if you want to expand on that at all.
No, absolutely. The cycle parking provision is meeting all the requirements in terms of larger cargo bicycles, accessible bicycles, tricycles, etc., to ensure that we provide the appropriate support in that mode of transport. Yeah.
And just very quickly on the basement, yes, it's also been designed with future uses. So we talked about it converting to servicing for the use in front, additional sort of cycle or servicing for that. So I think we certainly see that, that having a different future during the lifetime of the development.
Councillor Fane.
Thank you, Chair. A brief comment, non-committal for the reasons you outlined, and then a question, if I may. I was glad to hear the reference to roofscapes, which is perhaps sometimes an insufficiently considered aspect. I think I saw some roof gardens, and indeed I think Eleni in her comments confirmed that. And then turning to sustainability, I recognise that this would be BREEAM outstanding, which is an exceptional commitment. But just on the detail, I didn't spot any solar PV. That may not be involved. I don't know, and I may have missed this in the detail, what the heating will be, whether you have considered, for instance, ground source with the possibility of passive cooling. I think you may have considered cooling in other ways, but I think it is a matter that we have to turn increasing attention to. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'll start with the last one, which is about the cooling strategy for the building. Yes, we have considered all aspects that you mentioned, and it's a very fine balance, and achieving BREEAM outstanding, a NABERS 5-star, well platinum, LEED platinum is quite a task in hand. The cooling strategy will be generated by heat recovery, highly efficient air source heat pumps, and all this plant is on rooftop plant enclosures, which are, we're calling them the rooftop pavilions, so you wouldn't be seeing anything external. This is the main source of, this is the only source of cooling within the buildings. In terms of photovoltaics, again, they're fully integrated with our design, within our design response, and we've got in excess of 530 square meters across the entire site. So we've got green roofs, we've got photovoltaics within these rooftop plant enclosures. So these are cooling and PVs, and we talked about green terraces, which essentially we're providing outdoor working spaces for the new tenants coming onto the site. It's a substantial border of landscaping at the edge, so it minimizes any overlooking or avoids it altogether. And all of this approach together with our substantial landscaping on the ground floor essentially reduce the effect of the urban heat island effect. We have a very highly efficient strategy for all our operational plant. The design of the facades are following a passive design approach. We talked about passive house standards and methodologies, and all these methods are essentially reducing the heat rejection from the buildings.
Councillor Khan, please.
I just impressed by the reduction in the number of car parking spaces, and presumably quite a large increase in the number of employment on the site. With the assuming at present people park on Nuffield Road, or very few people park on Nuffield Road, because most of the sites have got adequate parking on the site. You're going to be providing a situation where quite a small proportion go by car, and it may well be that there will be people, whatever the desire to control them, there will be more people wanting to come by car. There's no control on much of Nuffield Road at present. Have you looked at the potential overspill and what controls might be needed in the case of you're not actually managing to reduce the number of people coming by car to the numbers of spaces that you've got?
I'll just start answering on this question, and then colleagues will help me on that. I just want to draw to us, yes, of course, we are bringing employment, about 1,200 for the lab of new people, but our microphone is on. But we are also bringing 700 cycle parking spaces, so we are actually balancing that impact on local settings. It's careful balancing, as you know. Reduced provision of car parking, which is one part of the pressure. Providing sufficient to bridge us over while mode of transport is changing. But providing 700 cycle spaces for number of people we are bringing on a site on alternative transport is already higher. So I just wanted to draw your attention, we are not counting just on the cars. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, if I may, I mean, you're right about Nuffield Road, but also the residential properties, residential areas sort of south of that as well. So we're continuing to have discussions with the local highway authority in terms of measures that we can employ. I mean, I think their view at the moment is that they may not be necessary, but I think we've been open to them, is that we can look at various ways that we can actually ensure that measures are put in place. So I think that discussion continues.
Thank you. Councillor Smart.
Thanks, Chair. So just one comment and then a list of questions, Chair. I'll be quick. So LVIAs and TVIAs, so I'm basically an amateur, but also when you present this to us as a planning application, residents will be listening. I think speaking plain English, it'd be good to know, here's the question, what you mean by an LVIA and TVIA. Is it just a picture, or is it something else? And are they different, to the extent that we need to know about it? So questions, you haven't mentioned any housing, so I presume there isn't any. That's what we badly need in Cambridge, housing. Big blocks of offices and labs next to residents' little standard houses is a concern. How is that mitigated? I know I've seen your pictures already in the presentation, but if you could say in your own words how you think that works. Bricks and concrete. So is there any low carbon concrete? Do you really have to use concrete? Cross-laminated timber is a regular construction technique. You've got a clean site. You can arctic it in from Austria, whatever. It's all possible. You don't seem to be interested in that, although I appreciate all the stuff you said about low carbon construction and BREEAM and all of these things. Councillor Parra mentioned toilets. So is there a changing places facility in the scheme? That's a toilet to be able to change not just a child but an adult as well. So you did two views going up Milton Road, one going down. Do you have one closer? Because I felt the one that was closer going down Milton Road towards the city would have showed it to be bigger. Councillor Bradnam said about grey water reuse. So how much is for WCs, or is it mostly all just to water the sort of grasses and things that we planted? And how much do you plan to save in terms of grey water compared with how much you plan to use? So in absolute litres or as a percentage? 50% landscape including roof, does that include roof gardens? 50% landscape, does that include paths and hard paving? Why are you planting 50% of the site? Parking, so Councillor Power mentioned parking. We don't really want any more cars, we've got enough. So why is that? On the water treatment works, we've talked about a zero trip budget. What's the trip budget for this scheme? There's no residence parking scheme in King's Hedges. So what do you plan to do about that? Are you going to pay for a scheme as a part of this project? Finally, do you plan to promote employment and apprenticeships for local residents like those in King's Hedges, where I'm a local councillor? Thanks. Well, you don't have to answer all those questions, just take them away, but it'd be good to answer the difficult ones now.
Councillor Smart, can you identify the difficult ones then, please? Which are your difficult questions? It's your call.
Why is the scheme planted 50%? Are you going to do apprenticeships? And how do you plan to mitigate the conjunction between big office blocks and little houses? Could also chuck in the cross-laminated timber, which I'm a great fan of.
Yeah, but I would have thought that was most important.
Eleni, you want to do the landscape, the proportion of the site?
Yes, of course. So starting with the existing condition, it's significantly tarmacked, very limited landscaping, which is less than 5% of the site. And this is actually being enhanced with only 50% of the site having building on it. And the rest of it is either landscaped or hardscaped, which is part of our public realm proposals, or our courtyard garden. So I think in actual terms, the landscape extent, the soft landscaping, I think is about 25%. I can't remember the exact figure, which is significantly improving the biodiversity net gain factor of the site and significant greening from where we were at the moment, linking into existing ecological corridors along the guided busway with the hedgerows that are there, and also introduction of new hedgerows along the eastern boundary. There was a question about the LVAs and TVAs, which are technical assessment in terms of the longer and closer views of the impact of the development we would be having in the surrounding context. This is a technical assessment, and they will all be included within our planning submission with explanation of what each view is looking at the moment as an existing setting and with the proposed benefits.
So they are, I should say, they're verified from specific points that are set by the planning officers. So they're not our visualisations or choices where to take them from. And we have 32 of them, rather than just the 7 we showed today.
That's right. There was a question about changing places, facilities, and the type of uses that are being provided. Sorry, shall I just run through as many of these answers?
If I can interrupt, I mean, you particularly told me to focus on the difficult questions. These questions are not the difficult ones.
You did. So please, can you just answer the difficult ones and take the others away, please?
Yeah, perhaps two. So I'll just finally on the LVI, so in my simple terms as well, the landscape and visual impact is the longer distance views and the townscape are the more...
Sarah, I really have, this was just a cursory, is that the right word, point at the start of my questions. There isn't a question, I've Googled it already, I know what it is, I think I've heard it before somewhere along the line, but that's not the main thing. I just wanted to, I was trying to help you, when you make a presentation for residents, they don't know what that is, so, plain English, but that isn't really a question.
I think two things. You talked about the relationship with the neighbours at the bottom. We started to talk about those as well. What we have got, and again, we only had the 20 minutes today, but we have done a daylight and sunlight assessment. So there's a BRE guidance on that. So that's all been assessed. That looks at the very detail of the neighbouring property. So it looks at individual windows, the use of those windows, the size of those windows. It goes into that level of sort of granularity, and all of that's presented. As I said, we're also looking at presenting information on the change in outlook from and the degree to which it is or isn't overbearing. So all of those aspects we're looking at in great level of detail, and that will all be presented. I think the other thing to say is that throughout our engagement, we have sought to engage with the local community, and particularly the local residents as well. So those immediate neighbours, we've sought to engage with them. And one of the questions you specifically asked, I think, is on the apprenticeships, and I think that's something that, yes, we are keen to look at the benefits more broadly for the local community, not something being done to them, something with them and for them.
There was a question on the trip budget.
Yeah, so we have a trip budget. In fact, the car parking that we're reducing by sort of 50% means that our trip budget will reduce. Actually, we've done all surveys along the road, so we know exactly how many vehicles, not just car parking space, but vehicles go in and out of the sites. And actually, we can show that there's a significant reduction on the trips. So again, there's a full transport assessment which will sit alongside this. A lot of that work has already been doing, all the surveys have been done, and that we presented, which will show a significant reduction in trips as well as parking spaces.
So there was a question on the construction materials. So it's good to have a zero carbon in operation, but is it a lot of embedded carbon in there? Have you considered cross-laminated timber? And also, have you considered the impact of the choice of materials on the heat island effect? Thanks.
Sorry, if I can take this question. In terms of upfront embodied carbon, which is the carbon in relation to materials, we have extremely high aspirations and set ourselves targets, firstly to say that there are no industry targets for lab or science buildings. So we have gathered information from industry metrics, including the Low Energy Transformation Initiative, the RIBA's and ICS's targets at the moment. And the design team are looking extensively at reducing the embodied carbon, firstly, of the structure. It's a fine balance. The laboratory buildings need to have a stiffer structure to ensure that the equipment is not vibrating, as well as looking at future flexibility and adaptability of these particular buildings, so they can also function as office buildings only in the future. CLT versus concrete versus steel frame and composite deck, it's all options that we're currently considering because we want to be reducing our upfront carbon, and the final solution will be part of our submission. In terms of the rest of the materiality on the facades, again, it's a fine balance. We are looking at a highly performing envelope, highly insulated. Solid to glass ratio is significantly higher in terms of more solid than what one would normally see. It's because we want to have very well insulated facades, and the type of material that we are looking for these facades are a contributing factor for the low U values and thermal performance of the building. So it's all a fine balance.
I'm taking people in turn, so that everybody has their say. First, Councillor Bajan. So I've noted you down. So you can just be patient, please. So it's Councillor Garvey.
My questions have been answered, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richard Williams, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just a few questions. A few questions about the grey water system. Could I just ask who bears the cost of maintaining the grey water system that you're proposing? Because, you know, there is a lot of maintenance involved in that. And presumably those charges, whoever bears them, will be additional to the charges that you would pay for water from the public water supply. And just a clarification would be helpful. Are the regulations in place for this sort of system? Because I know there are examples of grey water systems that have been promised in the city, but not yet delivered because of problems with maintenance and regulations. And then one other final, completely different question. Is there any proposal for any community space in this project? Because you are on the edge of quite an urban area, so would there be any facilities, community spaces that residents could use? Thank you.
So with regard to the grey water system, all of the components of this sit completely within our site. And therefore, in terms of the cost of installing it and maintaining it, as far as we're concerned, that sits squarely with us.
Community
space.
I think, sorry, it's quite useful to hear on the community space. I mean, as I said, we've got these sort of active, so the cafe. We're still looking at the precise uses of some of those areas. So I think we can sort of take that way as a specific question.
But yes, we'd like to see the cafe as it's a community-facing cafe and also an opportunity to actually bridge the community in the building and the community in the neighbourhood, which I think is very important. And the other opportunities around the active uses are to be developed really along those frontages. But we'd like to see again those things that are for the community rather than simply for people in the buildings.
Okay, I'm taking everybody in turn, Councillor Bradman, if you don't mind. So, Councillor Hawkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Some of my potential questions have been partly answered, but the ones that haven't been. Just to clarify, is this area part of the North East Cambridge Area Action Plan? So this proposal, does that meet with the policies we've proposed in that action plan?
Yeah, so the answer is, firstly, yes, it is within the area action plan area. I mean, we've been through all of these. So, I mean, the one that it doesn't, in terms of the indicative, is the heights that we've talked about. So, again, we've had these conversations over 18 months with your officers. I mean, there is an inconsistency between the council's council-state strategy, its landscape strategy, and the AAP itself. So there isn't a consistent picture through those three documents. They don't all say the same thing. For example, the townscape strategy identifies this site for a potential landmark building. So again, I think that's what's sort of driven us to have the conversations with your officer about actually what evidence do we supplement that. So it's not that we're not having regard to that, but what do we also look at? So that's all of the assessments that we've been done on the TVAs and LVIAs to actually assess the impact of what we are proposing.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's just that the clarification needs to be made because the question could be asked. We just need to show that, yes, there's policies, but you're deviating, but this is why. Okay, thank you. Because I also had a trip budget question on that, but you partly answered that, so thank you for that. In terms of, I wanted to focus on the community, and the speaker before me actually raised that, but there is one thing that is required in this area that nobody has talked about, and that's space for childminding. We have a great need. And bearing in mind the types of people who will be coming to work there, right? What you need to do is look at how you can make the facilities available for them. There'll be young people with families. So dropping off kids, picking them up, leaving work to go and pick, that's the sort of thing that will be needed further down the line. So part of, look at the potential for some of the areas, the ground floor spaces that you've mentioned. Something needs to be done for those who will be working there. Plus, you're next to a residential area. Community first, what's there now, they've been used to that, in bringing in all these big, for them, possibly ugly looking buildings. These people, them versus us, right, will be even more emphasized. So breaking that wall is very important. So please look at that and consider, not just for childminding, even for young people, all right? Somewhere where they can meet up and do things that are positive. Thank you.
Councillor Bagent, please.
Thank you, Chair. Not a lot, really. I think it seems very good. It looks good. I'd like to really reinforce what's been said by colleagues about community space. The idea of childminding might be something you want to think about, and also some way that you might embrace the community a bit more than, I mean, it's great that you've got open aspect and there's going to be a cafe and things like that. But this is being imposed on people. And whilst it probably isn't a reason to turn it down, it would be really advantageous probably to see something more involved with the community. So maybe take that away. I'm really interested. We have policies in Cambridge City to reduce the use of cars, and every time a planning application comes up, we get this same thing, a reduction in cars, but they're still there. So that continues to add to our car culture. So that's just a comment. What I'm really interested is when you say that you've thought about repurposing the car park if it is not needed in the future. How would you anticipate that you're going to do that? And would that change, I suppose this might be for officers, that change of use from car parking to something else, require it to come back to planning? But thank you.
Thank you for that, for your comments, and the really interesting question about repurposing a car park. And I will let Andy respond on the planning aspect, but in terms of repurposing, the way we're looking at the car park, it's providing sufficient floor-to-ceiling height within that space so that it can easily be adaptable to additional laboratory support spaces or technical equipment room, which we know that science buildings are very much in need of, that don't necessarily need too much daylight. If the car park isn't to be repurposed as a technical space, it can also be reused for additional cycle parking facilities as the mode changes and if so required. So these heights are very much driven by that response.
Councillor Bradman, you had one more question. Oh, sorry.
Yes, I mean, you'll take advice from your officers as well, but I mean, the simple answer is if there is a condition which requires us to come back to, so it depends on the stipulation that you put on any planning permission in terms of the precise use of that.
I think we can look into that. Certainly there's scope for more discussion, and we'll take that away as part of our pre-app dialogue. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Brown, you had one question.
Yes, just one. And others have raised the point, but I just wanted to clarify. As we're seeing the development of this area, I'm very mindful of the risk of displacement parking. Normally, I'm speaking up for my own parish, which is Milton to the north, where already we have people parking in Milton and then walking down to, for example, the Science Park and such like. Here, I'm concerned for the residents of Green Park, Maitland Avenue, Mortrock Avenue, which is off Nuffield Road, because if there isn't enough room in the car park, they will come out and try and park elsewhere in the local vicinity. And I just wondered, you said I'm glad to hear that you've done a survey of the amount of parking that there is there now, but do you have a plan to continue monitoring parking in those residential areas such that if there is a problem, you can, and have you got a plan for a travel plan to work so that you can monitor how many people are parking in your parking, how many people are using your cycling, how many people are using the bus, how many people are coming by train and scooter and all that kind of thing, and if there's any overspill into the residential area, that you have a way of saying, no, you need to stop using your cars and we will encourage you to use these other methods of public transport. Have you got such a plan in place?
I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, there's a very extensive sort of travel plan, again, for brevity today. We haven't gone into the detail of that. Discussions also carry on with the County Council about, traffic regulation orders and the likes, and we've made a commitment to contribute towards them, but that's something that has to be done in discussions within partnership with the communities rather than done to them. But yes, certainly those conversations continue with the county, but we will be doing all the monitoring as part of the travel plan, and further plans if what's been proposed isn't being achieved, to ensure that additional measures are put in place.
That's reassuring, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. I've got a question about building life and whether you've got existing but vacant possession of the site, and if you haven't, what's going to happen to the people who are going to be, the businesses are going to be displaced. But I'll just make some overall comments on what's been said today. I think it's very clear that we're concerned about the impact on the immediate and wider residential amenity of the community, and also the provision for the community. You've had a very good suggestion there in relation to childminding, but just remind you that this is a very, very divided city. So we have people living in damp, condensation, mould, people who are actually quite poor, and they see all of this huge investment being made in these tech buildings, with people with high-paid jobs and so on, and there's just no bridge between their situation and the wealth and prosperity that they can see every day of their lives. So it makes for a very uncomfortable situation, and we obviously welcome efforts that are made by developers and businesses to pay due regard to that and create more life opportunities and life chances for people. So don't need to take those away. Just thank you for the effort that you've put into all the pre-planning application discussions and the consultations with the community and your visits to the quality panel as well. Because this is the process that we go through, so we can be guaranteed that when you do come here with a planning application, it is of the highest quality. So this is how this committee works. So thank you very much. The T monitor has said we need a break. Thank you. Thank you, members. We're now on to agenda item 6, planning appeals update. And I'm going to ask the Strategic Sites Manager to introduce this item. Thank you. We are.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this update report is to provide an update in respect of decided and live appeals against planning decisions of the JDCC. The last update previously being provided at the September 2023 meeting of JDCC. My report is agenda item 6, page 21 of the hard copy. And I'm just going to ask my colleague Charlotte Peat, who's listening in, if she could share the PowerPoint presentation, because she's driving the show today. So thank you, Charlotte.
Apologies, bear with me while I get this right.
That's okay, Charlotte. If you have problems, just go on to the PowerPoint before presentation. Oh, well, that's it. Perfect. Okay, so if you move to the next slide, please, Charlotte. So the first update is in respect of a decision received in relation to the Brookgate application. This has been the subject of a planning appeal for non-determination. This relates to a site on the north-east edge of Cambridge within the South Cambridge District Council administrative area. The decision is one of approval, and I will go into the detail shortly. But just by way of reminder, members may remember that the application proposals were considered by JDCC in March 2023. It was a planning appeal for non-determination. For those who weren't at that committee meeting, the application site covers approximately 10 hectares of land to the north of Cambridge North train station, including the existing surface level railway station car park. It's bound to the north by the former Chesterton sidings, that's the area in yellow, to the east by the railway line, to the south by 1 Cambridge Square office building and 2 Cambridge Square Novotel hotel building. So that just gives you a little bit of context there. If we could move to the next slide, please. So the timeline with regard to the various main stages of this planning appeal. The appeal for non-determination was submitted to the Planning Inspectorate back in January 2023. And this was actually what we call a recovered planning appeal. It was called in by the Secretary of State. And this means that once the planning inspector has made their decision, their recommendation goes to the Secretary of State, and ultimately the final decision for whether the application proposals are approved or otherwise is within the Secretary of State's responsibility. A public inquiry sat in June 2023 and it closed in October last year. There is a typo in my report at paragraph 3.10. The close of inquiry was on the 19th of October 2023. And then earlier this year, on the 23rd of April, a decision letter was issued by the Secretary of State. And just a very quick refresh on the scheme proposals, if we could move to the next slide now, please. I'm not intending to go into detail, but just to give you some general context, this is a scheme that relates to an outline planning application for 3 new residential blocks on the left-hand side, sort of the 3 blocks in blue on the left, 425 residential units and 2 commercial buildings for office and R&D, so that's the outline element, and then a full application for 3 commercial buildings for R&D with flexible ground floor uses and a multi-storey car and cycle park building. And overall, the proposal would deliver about 48,000 square metres of office, lab and R&D floor space. So moving to the next slide, please. So the Council's position, which we defended at the public inquiry, focused on 3 reasons for refusal, which I've tried to summarise on this slide above. The visual and landscape impact, that the proposed height and massing of the development, especially on the eastern edge of the site, wouldn't be sympathetic to the surrounding area and would not be a well-designed place. The second reason relating to heritage impacts, again due to the height and massing of the proposed buildings. together with the siting of the buildings on the eastern side of the site again, would be a permanent change to the visual quality of the adjacent conservation areas. And then in design terms, it was considered by the council that the design of the proposals wouldn't provide a high quality public open space or a public realm which would result in a well-designed sense of place contributing to local distinctiveness. And also within this reason for refusal were concerns around the failure in the council's view to provide sufficient play areas for children. Cambridge Past, Present and Future, who had objected to the planning application, appeared at the inquiry as a Rule 6 party, and the Environment Agency, who had also objected to the planning application, appeared as an interested party, raising concerns regarding the increased demand for potable water use and potential to cause deterioration to water bodies in the Greater Cambridge area. The council did not put forward a reason for refusal based on water grounds. And at the public inquiry, evidence was presented by all sides in front of the inspector, including evidence in respect of the water resource issue. So moving now to the decision, the next slide please. The Secretary of State issued his decision letter on the 24th of April this year. He had considered the planning inspector's very comprehensive 200-page report, which was appended to the decision letter, and the Secretary of State agreed with the inspector's recommendation that planning permission should be granted, subject to planning conditions and planning obligations. And the Secretary of State didn't consider that the inspector's proposed optional planning condition in respect of delaying building occupation until the water resource management plan was approved should be secured. So turning now to a summary of that decision. Next slide, please. So I've referred to the main points of the Brookgate decision in my report at paragraph 3.15, and I'll turn to water supply and quality in more detail in a moment. But with regard to policy and statutory considerations, the Secretary of State agreed with the inspector that both the emerging North East Cambridge Area Action Plan and the Greater Cambridge Local Plan should attract very little weight. But it's worth saying, however, that the site does form part of the Cambridge Northern Fringe East Major Development Site under the policy in the 2018 South Cambs Local Plan for the creation of a revitalised employment-focused area intended to deliver high-quality mixed-use development. With regard to design and layout, the Secretary of State agreed with the inspector's conclusion that the proposal would deliver a high-quality design and distinctive sense of place, and that as a whole would respect and retain the character and distinctiveness of the local area. With regard to landscape and visual effects, the Secretary of State agreed with the inspector that the proposal would harm the character and appearance of the surrounding landscape, but such harm would be limited and generally localised. And when taken as a whole, it was found that the proposals would respect and retain the character and distinctiveness of the local landscape, including the River Cam corridor. With regard to heritage assets, the Secretary of State agreed with the proposal that the proposal would result in less than substantial harm to the significance of the conservation areas, and whilst the proposals would slightly impact onto the significance of the Fen Ditton conservation area, it would have very limited policy conflict. And in the planning balance, the benefits of the scheme were identified as high quality design and a sense of place, delivery of office and lab space and other economic benefits, delivery of housing and affordable housing, and environmental measures. Weighing against the appeal proposal were the identified harm to Riverside and Stourbridge and Fen Ditton conservation areas. Both the inspector and the Secretary of State concluded that the identified harm was outweighed by the benefits, and that in the planning balance, the scheme should be supported. So turning now to the specific issue of water supply and quality. Next slide, please. The Secretary of State noted that whilst water supply and quality is a material consideration, this particular proposal would not in itself harm water quality or water resources, even though the cumulative impacts would add to demand for water, and that the weight of this issue in the planning balance was neutral. The inspector left for the Secretary of State to decide whether the existing statutory water planning process and other measures in place in respect of water supply are robust enough to ensure that the appeal proposal wouldn't place unacceptable demand on water resources and potentially harm ecological interests. And if this was found to be the case, The inspector proposed an optional planning condition which would delay the occupation of development until the strategic supply solutions had been operational or the water resource management plan for the Cambridge water area had been approved. The Secretary of State didn't see the need for this planning condition, noting that the March 2024 joint statement on addressing water scarcity in Cambridge sets out plans for a water credits market and measures to meet the area's future water needs. In his view, the water savings through the government measures proposed in the 2024 March statement should deliver water savings sufficient to address concerns about sustainable water supply in the Greater Cambridge area. The Secretary of State took the view that in the context of the March statement, the proposals accord with the development plan, national policy on water and supply, and would not have an unacceptable consequence on water supply or quality. Next slide, please. So the Secretary of State's decision with regard to future planning applications and decision-making is important, specifically in respect of the issue of water supply and quality. Officer's view, supported by Council, is that this decision can be given significant weight because it provides an up-to-date assessment of how to approach the issues of water capacity and quality, and it's also a decision which deals with current government policy statements, the March 2024 ministerial statements. Officers are also of the view that the precise extent of the weight to be given to this decision may change over time, and we're going to be carefully keeping this matter under review. So going forward, when considering future planning applications which raise water supply and quality issues, consideration will need to be given to the March 2024 joint statement and progress of the proposed water saving initiatives and the water credit scheme. Officers intend to provide further insight and an update in more detail of this issue at an all-member briefing on water resources, which has been arranged for 23rd of July 2024. I'd now like to turn to an update in respect of a planning appeal which is still awaiting a decision. Next slide, please. So this relates to the Darwin Green 2-3 proposal on the northwest side of Cambridge. It's within the Darwin Green development site, top northern side of that site, bounded by the A14 to the north and Cambridge Road to the east. And again, members may recollect that the outline planning permission, which has been the subject of a non-determination appeal again, relates to up to 1,000 residential dwellings, new secondary and primary school, open space, community facilities, retail uses, and associated infrastructure. We could just move to the next slide, please, which just gives a summary of the timeline. A non-determination planning appeal was submitted in July 2023. And then in autumn last year, at the October JDCC meeting, members considered the non-determination report and the local planning authority didn't support the proposals due to concerns that the water to the development site could not be supplied sustainably and would cause harm to the environment by reason of impact on groundwater bodies. And that was the position that the council put forward at a public inquiry which was held in January this year. The council's position at that inquiry was that once it could be demonstrated that the demand for potable water to which the development will give rise can be supplied without causing harm to groundwater bodies, permission should be granted without delay. The council relied on the evidence presented by the Environment Agency, who had objected to the application proposals and appeared at the inquiry as a Rule 6 party. Since the inquiry closed in January, the council has been asked to comment on a number of published documents, including the March 2024 joint statement, the ministerial statement on addressing water scarcity, the Brookgate decision, and the revised draft water resource management plan, which was published at the end of February. To note that the appellant did put a cost claim against the council at the end of the public inquiry in January, but the appellant withdrew that cost claim following the council's acknowledgement of the Brookgate appeal decision. So that cost claim against the council was removed just last month. Once the inspector has written her report, it will again be for the Secretary of State to consider and make a final decision on the application proposals, because again, this is a called in or a recovered planning appeal. And at the current time, we don't know when that decision will be issued. That's an end of my update, thank you. The report recommendation is that JDCC notes the appeals update but I am happy to answer any questions arising.
Thank you for the presentation, Philippa. There's a lot in this statement, and the report is for information only. So what I'm proposing is that we proceed to end the live meeting, and we will be meeting for a briefing on another site, so we can then discuss any matters arising from what you've just heard. And I think that's the way to proceed with this. So I'll just say thank you for the report. And please can I remind members of the meeting that we're taking place on the 17th of July at Camborne, not the Guildhall. And if members are unable to attend this meeting, please could you liaise with alternates to ensure that the meeting is quorate and can go ahead. That now concludes the Joint Development Control Committee. Could we please could the meeting producer please end the live stream? Thank you.